All right, my 80s peeps, let's talk about the movie 16 Candles, starring Molly Ringwald, Anthony Michael Hall, and Michael Scheffling. Directed by John Hughes, written by John Hughes. Now, I would like to go on the record and say I'm very biased about one thing about this movie, is that out of all the 80s movies I've seen, my biggest heartthrob would be Jake Ryan. I think a lot of 80s girls are going to back me up on this one. All right, let's talk about casting right off the bat. So Viggo Mortensen, he auditioned for the part of Jake Ryan. He didn't get it. I will say Universal was pulling for him. When Michael Scheffling went into audition for Jake Ryan, he was so shy they weren't going to give him the part. So the producer, Michelle Manning, said, yeah, but he is so stunning and dreamy, we have to cast him for the part. So he got the part. Thank God. Not that Viggo's not, Viggo. I will tell you though, Molly Ringwald wanted Viggo for the part. She said he literally made her knees weak when he came in. But still, come on. So Jim Carrey auditioned for the role as Farmer Ted, played by Anthony Michael Hall. I will tell you, this part was created for Anthony Michael Hall. He was, when John Hughes wrote this, Anthony Michael Hall inspired him to make this part for him. However, they still had people come in and audition. And Jim Carrey came into audition, and John Hughes said he was amazing, but he still couldn't see anybody else playing that part. Let's talk about Molly Ringwald. Other people did audition for this part. Laura Dern auditioned for the part. Robin Wright auditioned for the part, and that is who Universal wanted. They wanted her to play Samantha. John Hughes fought to get Molly Ringwald that part, and she got it. Can you see anybody else, right? I always do this when I say these. Can you see anybody else? But you can't, right? Because they do. They become the part becomes them, I do believe. So in an interview, Molly Ringwald said, of all the movies that she's worked on with John Hughes, this was the most fun movie to work on. Very beginning of the movie, Molly Ringwald was wearing that hat, and the movie's costume designer begged her, please don't wear the hat. She didn't like it, the whole look of it for the movie. Molly Ringwald refused, kept the hat on, which I think is amazing that this girl had so much say in these movies. But she kept the hat on, and then after that movie came out, it was a craze. All the teenagers were buying hats. So that was pretty cool. So let's talk about the cast's ages. Michael Scheffling, when he filmed this movie, he was 23 years old. Haviland Morris, Caroline, she was 24 years old when they filmed it. When the movie came out, she was 25. Geddy Watanabe, he was Long Duck Dong. He was 28 in real life when he filmed this movie. Now, Molly Ringwald and Anthony Michael Hall, they were only 15 when they filmed this movie. They were actually teenagers. Michael Anthony Hall actually picked out who would play Bryson Weezy, because when they did the cattle call and all the people came in, John Hughes said to him, listen, you pick them out because they're going to be your friends on the show. Like, that's who you would pick for your friends, so you pick them. And then he did. He picked Bryson Weezy's characters. Now, there's been controversy about Geddy Watanabe's character in 16 Candles, about being stereotypical and insulting. I don't know if you realize this, but he did not have an accent in real life. He made that accent up. I will tell you, when they were filming the scene where he's laying on the ground, the drunk scene, and he's laughing hysterically, he's ticklish in real life, and they needed him to laugh hysterically. So John Hughes was actually tickling his feet during that scene to get him to laugh. I thought that was oddly funny, interestingly weird. You know the dance scene, Molly Ringwald's wearing that cute dress during the school dance? That wasn't intended for her. That was supposed to be worn by her best friend in the scene, and she asked the costume designer if she could have it because she really loved the dress. Carlin Glynn, who plays Samantha's mom, she's the real-life mom to Mary Stuart Masterson, who later goes on to play a co-leading role in Some Kind of Wonderful, another John Hughes film. Thought that was interesting. When they started filming this movie, Molly Ringwald and Anthony Michael Hall did not like each other at all. So John Hughes took them both to a record store to hang out for a while. And they both realized they liked the same music. So they got past a lot of that animosity and started becoming friends. By the time they did The Breakfast Club, they started dating. And it didn't last, but they went from frenemies to friends to boyfriend, girlfriend. Just thought that evolution was funny. I didn't realize they didn't like each other. At the time, I didn't know that. Do you remember the scene in the movie where Ginny's walking down the aisle bombed? She's bombed out of her head. And she's acting goofy and then sits down in a pew. The woman sitting next to her in the pew is Agnes Belushi, Jim and John Belushi's mom. Tell me how random that is. There's some little, I don't know, do they call these Easter eggs? So if you see the license plate of Samantha's dad's car, it is V58. V58 stands for Vacation 58. So John Hughes had wrote for National Lampoon magazine, and he wrote a thing called Vacation 58. Vacation 58 later becomes National Lampoon's vacation movie that we know and love with Chevy Chase. So that license plate is an ode to that, V58. Now, Jake Ryan's red car, that license plate is 21850. That is John Hughes's birthday, which I thought was interesting. Also, John Hughes and Molly Ringwald have the same birthday, just a different year. The shower scene with Haviland Morris, Caroline, Jake's girlfriend, that is a body double just because they talk about, Molly Ringwald was talking about how big her boobs are and stuff in the movie, and she really didn't have big boobs. So she didn't want to do that. She said, I have nothing against being nude. It was just it didn't match the storyline. So they had to get a body double for that scene. Surprisingly, with that scene, they didn't get an R rating because you can only have so many F words and nudity and stuff like that. So it was a little bit of a battle to get it down to a PG rating, which they did. He liked to have the same people basically in his movies, like John Capello's. He was the brother-in-law in this. He was in Weird Science. He was in The Breakfast Club. He was the janitor. So he was in 3 of John Hughes' movies. And if it was up to John Hughes, he would have kept having Molly Ringwald and Anthony Michael Hall in all his movies. But they eventually put an end to it. I think in Some Kind of Wonderful, he actually wanted them for it. But, you know, eventually Anthony Michael Hall's like, yeah, I want to do something different now. And then the same thing with Molly Ringwald. And I think it really hurt him. And it was kind of like, I don't want to say the end of their friendship, but it kind of was, you know, because he always wanted them in their movies, and they wanted to move on. They were his muse for his teen movies, and that's when I think he started doing more kids movies like Home Alone and Uncle Buck and stuff like that. But yep, so. And that being said, those are the inside deets on the movie 16 Candles. I don't know if you guys know this, but you know, Michael Scheffling didn't stay in acting long, so he moved to Pennsylvania and became like a wood maker, cabinet maker or something. Started his own little business. And I live in New Jersey, probably just a few hours from there. Anyway, those are the inside deets on 16 Candles. I'm going to go now. Maybe I'll take a little ride to Pennsylvania. That's all I got.